everybody, and welcome to this week's class, this month really. And this is about Christianity and yoga and the connection between them. I call this the gentlest soul. You will learn why at some point during this. This is part 1 of 2. This part I'm going to be looking at the whole idea of the crucifixion and the resurrection, and address this question which people have been asking for a very long time. Did Jesus really die on the cross? This is not a new idea. It's not something that people just started talking about in the last 100 years or so. This has been a question mark pretty much since year 1. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about my own relationship with Jesus. It got off to a bit of a rocky start, I have to tell you, because my father was an atheist and my mother was a Quaker. So the Quakers are a sort of pacifist Protestant sect, but she didn't wear it on her sleeve. She was kind of quietly spiritual, I would say. But I got to know the Quakers. We used to go along with my mum, and Dad would come as well just to keep us company, because all of our friends were Quakers, and they were the backbone of the peace movement in New Zealand, which my parents were as pacifist, were very involved in. So my experience of religion was going on an anti-nuclear march when I was 5 years old in 1960, during the Cold War. And all the people on the march, at least half of them I think, were Quakers. A lot of them were. So I saw them as people of social conscience, who cared about humanity and were against violence and war, and so I thought that was good. But by the time I got to, I think I must have been about 11. I graduated from the Sunday school, and we started. I had to go to the adult program, which was sitting in a big kind of hall with all the adults. I was an 11-year-old adult, and in silence. I was sitting there in silence for an hour, which is not the kind of thing that 11-year-olds tend to be very fond of doing, and I didn't like it much, and I didn't really understand what I was supposed to be doing there. Unfortunately, they didn't teach me how to meditate. Maybe things would have been different. But I told my mum, I said, look, I don't actually believe in God, and I don't want to go to the spiritual meetings anymore. And she said, that's okay, it's up to you. So she was pretty cool. So poor old Jesus, I'm sorry, I walked away for a while there. But I did come back. I was much later, so that was 11, 12 years old. When I was 18, I was actually staying with another family. I moved away from my parents and moved to a different city to go to university. And I was staying with a family, and I was friends with their children. And the father, he was a vicar, an Anglican vicar. This is the Anglican sect is a kind of English Christianity. This was Henry VIII's take on Christianity, where the Pope didn't get to tell him what to do. So it's sort of like the Catholic Church, but without the Pope. And the vicars get married. That's another big difference. But they have the Eucharist, the wine and the wafer, the holy wafer. So they do that whole ritual as the Roman Catholics do. So it's not really Protestant. Anyway, I used to go with them out of politeness because I was living in their house, and the vicar is the father of the house, and they were all Christian. So I used to go along with them sometimes, sort of out of. I liked them. They were a wonderful family, and I actually started going to church, and I really had no interest in the spiritual side of it, but somehow I got roped into playing a role in the church play, and this was the play for must have been Easter. So it's for Passover, I think is it called. It was when Jesus came into Jerusalem, and when he came into Jerusalem, he was riding on a donkey. And guess who got to be the donkey? It was me. So I got to be Jesus's donkey. And I have to tell you, it was interesting. There was this moment when we finally got to act the play, we had to rehearse it. There was this moment where I was thinking, wow, I'm this donkey. I got into the role. I'm this donkey, and I'm carrying this divine being on my back, and I feel pretty good about this. And the donkey actually, Palm Sunday, thank you, somebody who actually knows about this stuff. Yes, it was Palm Sunday. And I got to carry Jesus on my back into Jerusalem in the play, and the donkey's part was like this. So everybody else was, after Christ was crucified, and they're all sort of saying, oh, well, I was Christ's friend, and he spoke to me, and he healed my brother, and everyone's trying to claim that they've got some sort of connection or relationship with Jesus. And I finally, I think I had the last word. I sort of said, look, I carried him on my back. And that was the donkey. So I got this little feeling for, of appreciation, partly because of the goodness of this family, their kindness, and also because of being Christ's donkey. And it's not like I kept going to church or sort of studying the Bible or anything, but it kind of reconnected me, brought me back in touch with this tradition, which some aspects of it are incredibly beautiful and touching and deep, and it's a mixed bag, though, as you might know. Years later, I started reading a bit about the history of Christianity, and that was not quite as kind and gentle, but it was certainly not Jesus's fault. Let's put it that way. So in this story or exploration that I want to lead you through, I want to look at this idea that there is some sort of connection, similarity, maybe historical connection between the mystical traditions of yoga and Buddhism as well, actually, perhaps, and Christianity. And part one, we're exploring this crucifixion and the resurrection. And let's have a look at what's going to happen after that. So part one's about this question of, the crucifixion itself, which is, of course, you could say the central event in the Christian faith, because the resurrection is what so much of the belief system hangs upon. This part two, which I'll be presenting on the first Tuesday of December, is the other big question mark over Jesus' life, was the 18 missing years. There's nothing in the Bible, there's no mention of him between the ages of 12 and 30. So when he appeared, and very shortly after met his favorite donkey. So that's a big question mark. What happened in that period? And then, of course, the last part was, well, what if he did survive the crucifixion, which is unknown, but there's many people believe that he did, actually, more than I realized until I started studying this. What did he do then? I mean, he was only 33 years old. The events of the Bible, apart from the little bit about his childhood, essentially cover from 30 to 33. So we don't know very much about his life, and there's a lot of speculation. This is a good one. Even Aleister Crowley said, thanks, Yatendra. Even Aleister Crowley, if you know who he was, said, don't blame Christianity on Christ. So Aleister Crowley was a kind of a bit of a demonic fellow himself. Yeah, definitely. So let's start looking at this a little bit. I want to start off by looking at sources. So how do we know about any of this stuff? How can we even begin to guess? I mean, it's impossible to verify 100% any of this, as far as I can tell, depending on what sources you believe in. But the secular history, we'll have a quick look at that. There isn't much. The Bible, means the official Bible, the Catholic Church Bible. Now, I'm not going to go into the other versions of Christianity because I don't have enough knowledge of them. But the Orthodox, the Eastern churches, and so forth. Much, though there's a few references from the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox texts. But this is mainly focused on the Roman Catholic set of 4 Gospels, and then the writings of Paul. So the official Bible is one source. Another is the Apocryphal Gospel. Apocryphal means unofficial, like the unrecognized Gospels. There are a lot of them. There's like 40, I think, by all sorts of different people. We'll look at those a bit, and some of the Eastern Orthodox texts. The Quran refers to Jesus and talks about him somewhat. There are a number of Sanskrit texts from India that speak about him as well, and then is what makes sense in terms of the actual what he taught, what was taught as in the Judaic tradition that he grew up in, and where did these completely new ideas that are very different to Judaism, where did they come from? We could say, well, according to this Bible, they were his divine inspiration, but maybe there was some other source, because a lot of those teachings look a lot like Tantric Buddhism. And then the last possible source is intuition. So there are various sages, and Edgar Cayce, of course, was a very famous psychic, and he had some insights about what he believed about Jesus. Sri Yukteswar, the guru of Yogananda, wrote extensively about Jesus and kind of interpreted the Bible in terms of through the lens of yoga philosophy. And Anandamurti, Sri Anandamurti, my guru, he also said a few things about Jesus, which I'll share with you at some point. Hitendra is just mentioning the Nag Hammadi scriptures. Yeah, those are part of the Sanskrit text that I'll show you a bit later. There's a number of those, but you even know the name of one. I haven't even memorized. I've got them all written down here because there's so much information about this. Jesus Christ was probably the most famous person in history. So if, considering that there are these huge question marks over his life is such a mystery. And the claims made about him are so extraordinary. The official story that he gave his life for the salvation of all of humankind, that he physically ascended to heaven. These are so grand that there's a lot of talk, a lot of books, a lot of films and videos and documentaries, and there's probably billions of web pages about this subject, the question of who Jesus really was. And you can't talk about Christianity with talking about Jesus. In fact, I've said this is about Christianity and yoga, but really it's about Jesus Christ himself, trying to get some understanding of who maybe he really was, trying to sift through all of these different ideas and sources. So here we go. And feel free to chime in. I'm enjoying the comments in the text, in the chat, and you're welcome to use your mics. We're a pretty small group. And I know that a couple of you have probably read about this perhaps more widely than me, so I'm not I'm not a world expert in this, believe me. But I do find it fascinating, and for a period I was very interested in this. And the first version of this workshop I gave at a church. It was a unity church. So the unity churches in the US are very kind of progressive. I think of them as a kind of new age church. They come under the umbrella of New Thought churches. There are about 600 unity churches, or was it 400? There's a few hundred unity churches in the US. It's not a very big church. New Thought is bigger than that. There's maybe another, 3 times that under the other New Thought sects. So I gave. I was a guest minister at one of the New Thought Unity Church in, I think it was Greensboro in North Carolina. And so I gave the service and I sang some music and they liked that, and I led them in a meditation, and then I did a workshop afterwards, which a few of them came to, including the minister. And I gave this workshop about, it's pretty challenging to give a workshop at a Christian church, essentially saying that Jesus Christ was a yogi, or at least that I think he probably was. And but they liked it, and the minister liked it so much she came to our retreat and took initiation into an Anandamaga meditation. So that worked. So I thought I might as well do this again for you folks and see what you make of it. And I learned a few new things since then as well. So let's look at the secular history. So this is what, secular means, the worldly history. What's written in the historical records from the time, such as they were. Now, who was keeping records in that part of the world? Well, guess who? The Romans, because the Romans had their empire, and this was the eastern edge of their empire, which encompassed much of Europe and a lot of North Africa, and it came across into the Middle East to some extent, but that was the eastern edge. And you've got to remember this was what in the rule in the time of Augustus Caesar, I guess. If I'm not mistaken, formerly Octavius became Augustus Caesar, after which our month of August is named. But so Jesus, there's no mention of him directly in the historical records, except this mentions here. There's some. It says here that there's a reference to the followers of Christos causing civil unrest. This is still happening. This has not gone away. 2,000 years later, 50 AD, they weren't talking about Jesus, but his followers. And of course, then the movement grew, and it was they didn't accept Roman rule, and they were persecuted, and that's well known. And there's lots of records of that, and famous stories of them being killed and tortured and fed to lions, and all sorts of terrible persecution. There are clear records of other characters that appear in the biblical story. So Pontius Pilate, of course, and King Herod and and even John the Baptist, but no mention of Jesus. So of course Pontius Pilate and King Herod were, leaders of the time, and Pilate was a Roman official, so he was of course in the records. But this Rudolf Bultmann is a very, very authoritative theologian. He said the personality of Jesus, the clear picture of himself and his life, have vanished beyond recall. Which is why, of course, there's so much controversy, because, we have the version from his followers, the Christian church, but if you're not a Christian, then you have to, you're necessarily going to think, well, that's going to be biased. That's going to, they already accept this doctrine and they've got their version of events, but where can I find a more objective record? And the pretty much isn't one. So this is a big problem if we want to understand what really happened. But we do need to look to sources other than that of, the official church record, because they have their particular perspective, which is necessarily from anyone else's point of view going to be heavily biased. But let's start by looking at that and look at the official four Gospels, okay? So the first thing is to understand, how are these Gospels actually written? I have a question for you. Can you tell me which of the 12 disciples of Christ, which of them actually had a hand in writing the Bible in these four Gospels? We've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So who amongst them was actually a direct disciple of Jesus who actually knew him? Can you tell me? I'd like to know if you... I'm pretty sure that a couple of you have an idea. Some of you might be experts that I don't know about. I'm curious.
If I'm not mistaken, all of them are.
So you have the impression that all four of them were direct disciples?
Yes.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? John. Uh, okay. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay. We'll have a look at that in a minute. Any others? Everyone's not sure now. Luke, okay. It's everybody's getting a chance. What now? You've left out. Well, you thought all of them were. What about Matthew and Mark? Wasn't Matthew the tax collecting fellow? Are you're admitting that you're guessing? Yes, I think that's probably a pretty good idea to mention that. So let's just begin to look at this. This is see. Why do I ask that question? Because before I started actually just doing a little bit of research into how the Bible was written, of course I assumed that these four characters knew Jesus. I mean, some of them. I mean, John gets big mention in the Bible, and there was a Matthew there. Honestly, I don't know the names of the 12 apostles. The apostles, and again, I'm showing my ignorance. I have plenty. Apostles is the same. Does that mean the same thing as disciples?
The apostles were his immediate circle.
So that would be the 12 disciples.
And then there were other additional disciples that were followers of him. But they're kind of an interchangeable term. But the actual apostles are the 12 that are pictured in the Last Supper painting.
The Last Supper, okay. Yeah, from
of course,
Da Vinci. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. I've sort of more or less understood that. Okay. Now let's see what's happening here. So this gives us a clue. There's at least 60 years between the crucifixion and the writing of these four. These are called the synoptic gospels. Means these are the ones that are approved or considered to be authentic by the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, and remember these were selected from numerous other records, but these four were selected as the authentic ones. So again, this historian, he says there's no certainty that the words of this oldest stratum of oral tradition were actually spoken by Jesus. The tradition collects the Lord's sayings, remolds them, and adds to them. Furthermore, other kinds of sayings are also collected, so that some of the words included in the collections of sayings will have been put in Jesus' mouth by others. So that's interesting. Let's have a look at how the official Bible was selected. We'll get back to which of these four which of the actual apostles were witnesses. Oh, no, you had to leave us for this. Well, okay, thanks. This is being recorded. You can check on it. You can watch it later if you want. So this is a very important point in the history of particularly the Catholic Church. So the Nicene Council was a council ordered by the Emperor Constantine, and the story is that up until this time, up until 325 AD or around that time, just before that, Christianity was not the official religion of the empire. They had their own Roman gods and goddesses, and they were the official gods and goddesses. And they were all basically copied off the Greeks. They were just all the Greek gods and goddesses with their names changed. So, Jupiter and so forth. So, when Emperor Constantine, he was about to go into some battle. It was some critical battle. I don't remember the name of the battle. The night before, he had a dream. And in the dream, he saw a cross, the symbol of the Christians. And he took it as a sign. And he was thinking, maybe this is a sign that I should become a Christian. But he didn't do it on the spot. He wasn't sure. So he said, look, if I win this battle, okay, I'll take this sign as my sign and I'll become a Christian. And he won the battle and he became a Christian, all right? So now the emperor is the boss of the empire. And so this then became the official, from being a persecuted religion, very controversial, and all the Christians were a very, oppressed group. They went very suddenly to being the official religion of the whole empire. Now, then they had to decide, okay, what is the official version of our scripture? Because there were many. There was no internet. There was no, printing. Books were written by hand, okay, and most people couldn't read. And there were many different versions of different stories and that defined Christianity. So the emperor, the Roman Empire was a great, had a tremendous bureaucracy. They wanted everything to be official. They wanted to standardize things. They had to make an official version of the Bible. And thanks for correcting me, Karun. This is perhaps the Council of Nicaea. There's the more correct term, and they're the source of the Nicene Creed. Okay, a relatively short summary of the core beliefs. Well, I knew you'd come up with some useful, additional, more accurate information. So they had to decide on the official version, and they selected these four Gospels. And the story I heard, and this may not be accurate, but the story I heard is that all these sort of various heads of the church, because they didn't have one leader of they had somebody presumably was, who carried on the succession of the Pope, but it wasn't clear if everybody agreed who that was. But they had their sort of scholars or head people who had to decide which is the official version of the Bible, and they had various versions, and they weren't sure which they were going to decide upon, and they decided to all go home and go to bed and decide in the morning, and I think they even decided that the one that if there was one of them miraculously appeared on the table in the middle, that would be the official one, and that apparently happened. Though some people suspect that some clever person snuck in there in the night and actually put it there. So who knows what happened? This is very hard to know. So these four Gospels were selected, and most records, these were a minority of the versions and documents available. Most records were discarded and declared heretical. So it wasn't just that they sort of saying, okay, this is the official one. Everything else is. It's not just not part of the official creed. It's somehow enemy, and heresy became to be a pretty serious issue at various stages in Christian history, as you may know. Okay, let's have a look at the Gospels themselves. So Matthew, the original Hebrew was lost. It only exists in Greek, and as far as I know, Matthew was not the same Matthew who was an apostle, because it's too many years later. People didn't live that old in those days, remember? Going back, yes. Mark, this seems to be very authentic, as it was first-hand from Peter, who was an eyewitness. So Mark also was not an apostle. I'm not sure about Matthew. I think Matthew, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't the same Matthew who was an apostle. Mark heard it first from Peter, who was an eyewitness. So this seems to be possibly the most authentic of the Gospels. This is, like a really tight synopsis. There are thousands of books have been written about this, as you can imagine. So this is the one slide summary of what these Gospels, where they stand. So Luke derives from earlier authentic writings which were ordered destroyed. So there's no way of verifying them. But Luke also was not an apostle. John, they don't even know who he was. They're not sure whether he wrote it. he gives some important details that are not mentioned in the other Gospels, such as the story of Lazarus. Paul, I think, definitely never met Jesus. He had some visions of Jesus and basically made up his version of events, as far as I can tell. But it's very unclear if even one of the authors of the Bible even knew Jesus. Right? So that is interesting. What does the gospel, since for this first part's about the crucifixion itself, what do the Gospels say on crucifixion? And this is challenging the official version. So I've selected reasons to doubt the official version, which of course is that Jesus died on the cross, was carried into the tomb and laid on the stone, and that 3 days later he came back to life and then ascended physically to heaven. So there's no body, right? So let's have a look at these. He was only, according to which I forget which of the Gospels, he was between 3 and 6 hours on the cross. This is not nearly long enough to die. Normally, people in this form of crucifixion would take 2 or 3 days to die, unless they broke their legs, which was considered a mercy because it accelerated the process, which was not fun. Right, yes, Paul, yeah, he persecuted Christians. Yeah, I know that, I know the story. So just to clarify that, Paul, of course, his writings are a very important part of Christian philosophy. They're not part of those 4 Gospels, but they're an official part of the pantheon, or of the, no, it's not the word pantheon, what's the word? The creed. He himself persecuted Christians. He was a leader, and his name was Saul, and then he was converted by his spiritual experience, and he became a great devotee and wrote. He was a great intellectual. He wrote a lot, but it was kind of his inspiration and ideas, and it was sort of more his philosophy than coming from the Bible or from, well, I don't know if it came from Jesus. He thought it did. But let's get back to these guys. Okay, so this is from according to the Gospels. He took 3 to 6 hours to die on the cross. That didn't happen. So who confirmed that he was actually dead? It was a centurion who apparently was a follower. So he's a suspect.
I hate to interrupt, but you've also got to realize that he was punished and tortured well beyond where most people were punished and tortured before they were put on crosses.
Sure, he
was tortured for days.
Yeah, that's true. But so were many of the other slaves and so forth who were crucified. They were also very harshly treated before being put in that situation. But it was very inconsistent with the pattern of how long it took people to die on the cross that he would die.
I'm not denying that.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
I'm just saying that, he had the crown of thorns. We always see it, and it's portrayed as this little rosy thing with these little thorns on it, but they used hawthorns, which are 6 to 8 inches long, and jammed them into his brain. I mean, the man physically was not much left.
Possibly, yeah. It's hard to know.
Yeah, it's a very inaccurate recording, but I mean, just what they recorded is like, I would hate to see it. It sounds like something out of a Japanese concentration camp.
Oh yeah, it doesn't. Well, you can watch what's his name's movie if you want to get the graphic version. The Australian guy, staunch Catholic. He was in Braveheart. What's his name again? The movie director and actor. Mel Gibson. He made a very graphic version of the crucifixion story, which a lot of people found very disturbing. It was probably a bit too real. So the centurion who confirmed his death was himself a disciple, effectively, or a follower. So that's raises a question mark. The disciples were in a hurry to remove him from the cross, but the big one for me is that there were multiple records of sightings of Christ after the crucifixion. And here's from Luke. And he said unto them, Why are you troubled? And why do thoughts arise in your hearts? Behold, my hands, my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit hath not flesh and bone. Because they were afraid he was a ghost. It seems clear that the disciples thought he had actually died, and then, or at least some of them. But whether he did or not is unclear. But when he appeared to some of them thought he was a ghost, and they were afraid. So he's reassuring them. Behold, my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Handle me and see. For a spirit, or a ghost, hath not flesh and bones, as ye see me to have. And when he had thus spoken, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they yet believed not for joy, and wondered, he said unto them, Have ye here any meat? And they gave him a piece of a broiled fish and of a honeycomb, and he took it and did eat before them. So, ghosts don't eat fish or honey, apparently. So, of course, this is, and this is not the only incident, but this is from one of the Gospels, so that's why it's cited here. There are many other records, and we'll see some of them, of people meeting him. Of course, the famous one is Thomas meeting him on the road. I just want to go to a little aside here. You may have seen this movie or read this book by Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code. So, of course, there are various theories about what happened to Christ if he did survive the crucifixion. The Templars, the Knights Templar, who were this very powerful sect who, they were a sort of military monks, and they were very central to the whole crusading tradition, and they were supposed to they captured Jerusalem, then lost it again, and they started the first Christian banks, and they were tremendously wealthy and powerful. There is an ongoing mystery around this story that they actually found the body and the bones of Christ, and they took them to France, and that they're buried in the French Alps. And there are people searching to this day to find the bones of Christ. Okay? Now, what does that imply? If there are the bones of Christ, it means there was a dead body, which means that he didn't physically ascend to heaven, which is central to the creed of the Catholic tradition. So the Templars themselves, who were fanatic Christians, it seems that they had this secret, tradition amongst themselves, which actually contradicted the creed of the Ascension. And this is one of the reasons why the Templars eventually were destroyed by the Pope. They were all killed.
Friday the 13th.
Yeah. It was. Oh, is that why Friday the 13th is remembered?
Yes. The French king actually had them assassinated on Friday the 13th. I don't remember what month, and I can't remember what year.
Wow. Yeah, the Templars are a whole other story there. I used to live in Malta, which was the headquarters, the island of Malta in the middle of the Mediterranean, near Italy. And it was the headquarters of the Templars for 400 years. It was a very interesting place to live. Of course, in the Da Vinci story, which I got to assure you, this story is not based on much reality at all. It's very, very completely fanciful. But the story is that Jesus went to France and had living descendants, and Audrey Tautou, this French actress, this is great-great-great-great-granddaughter. But that's a little bit of a lighter take on this thing. But there are all kinds of stories and beliefs and myths and conspiracy theories and all kinds of things around this. So it's kind of fun sometimes. So I've got a question for you here before we go into some more of these sort of what evidence, such as it is. I want to ask, you've just sort of addressed this question, and if Jesus didn't die on the cross, so what? Why is it such a big deal? And why was the Roman Catholics so intent on maintaining this story, the official version of the Bible? I mean, they were really serious about this. As we just heard, they wiped out the Templars possibly because of heretical beliefs. They right through for hundreds of years they persecuted mercilessly anyone who questioned the orthodoxy of the Bible, and
including other Christian sects.
it's one of the reasons a lot of people don't like Christianity, because of this behavior on the part of the church in that period particularly. But why? What was their motive? Why were they so insistent on this version of events? Why did it matter?
Control.
Please elaborate.
Okay, so in Ananda Marga, we interrelate directly with the Creator.
Okay, I'm going to jump out of my sharing the screen so we can see each other and talk about this a bit, because I think this is very important, and I want to get your the views of you folks, and I'm going to go to gallery view so I can see everybody. Okay, so please continue.
So in Ananda Marga, we interrelate directly with the Creator. If there is a go-between, which according to the Gospels and the New Testament, Christ was the physical go-between, then Peter was the first pope, and you have to go to someone to make intercession for you with the Creator, that you can't go there directly. Then you have to have a hierarchy that controls that. So you must maintain the dogma of that. We're the representatives in order to maintain the control over the populace.
So I think there's a lot. I think you got a lot of good points there. Any other thoughts on that, or the motive of the church hierarchy, why they wanted to maintain this version of events, not just of the Gospels, but all of the official doctrine of the church that they added later as well. Karun, you want to add something?
It's somewhat similar. I think it's Jesus became divine because the Caesars were divine, and so you needed another god. At least this is one of the theories, but you needed another god to counteract that god, and that it's not necessarily clear that people that were contemporaries thought Jesus was divine. That may have developed later. And then once you've got this god, you kind of need to support the god, and it kind of becomes self-perpetuating.
Mm-hmm.
Organizations like to perpetuate.
Okay, we've got a long comment here from Kosher Woodlands. I'm looking forward to this talk. Kim James's version hasn't been speaking to me like it used to. The Hindu philosophy of enlightenment over ignorance is appealing. Whenever I have had a question about anything in the Bible, I was told that I'm a sinner and not to question it. And of course, the creation story supports this idea. Curiosity doomed humanity. Okay, man and woman eat from the tree of knowledge and are cast out of the garden as punishment. I'm also trying to separate American Christianity from actual biblical Christianity at the moment. Okay, there's a lot of pieces there. That's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Fascinating. I just want a few things I want to comment on. All of this is a lot of pieces I want to break down here. Okay, so what is kosher? Is that your the name you usually use? Kosher Woodlands. Anyway, just let us know if. So you're saying that you mentioned that yes, that's your Iraqi name. Okay, fine. Thank you. So the King James Version is, of course, as it implies, the English King James sort of made that official, and that is considered the official version of the Bible in the present day. It's
I wouldn't go that far. There are many translations.
Oh, so there isn't one official version.
Oh no,
it's considered the most orthodox of the versions. But my father has collected the former pastor has a collection of a Bible that he put together that has 26 versions, not including New International.
Yeah,
Okay.
Or the Greeks.
I mean, the Christmas story sounds funny if it's not in King James, but I mostly grew up on the New Revised Standard, and then there's a new one called The Message that's much more contemporary. There are lots of translations.
Well, just going about that time period, there's like 13 translations from around the time period, about 200 years, 100 years before, after the King James, the Septuagint, the Tyndale.
Okay.
I mean, there are a lot of Bibles.
Right.
All right. Well, hence the confusion.
Right.
Yeah. And the Catholic Bible, has 75 books. The King James has 66. Yeah. And the King James Bible was made to support the Episcopalians or the English Orthodox, whom Henry VIII had actually pulled away from the Pope and started.
I was just wondering about that because I was thinking King James, he was an Anglican, not a Catholic. Right. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
The Anglicans were started originally so that Henry Tudor could have his divorces without being excommunicated.
Exactly. He didn't like being bossed by the Pope. So there you have it. So you mentioned the Hindu philosophy of enlightenment. I just want to clarify my position. I'm not a Hindu. I'm not a Christian. Clearly, I don't know as much about it as at least some of you. That's for sure. But I'm not a Hindu. I'm a yogi, and Hinduism and yoga are not the same thing. It is a whole different subject, but I just want to clarify that. Okay, this thing of sin, an original sin, of course, that is a central part of the official Christian teaching, because that's what Jesus has saved us from. And I think your point is very important, Hitendra, that it's about power. It's about control. Because the priests, and this is not in the old versions of the Bible at all, this idea that the priests have to hear your confession and bless you in order for you to be free of sin. This is not an original Christian idea. This was brought in later to put the priests in a position of power, and specifically to give the Pope the power of excommunication over the kings. Because the Roman Catholic Church, over time, it became this incredible powerhouse in Europe. But how were they going to control all of these kings? They used excommunication as their ultimate weapon. Because if the Pope excommunicated a king, it didn't matter if the king didn't believe in excommunication. The people did, and the people would not follow a king who was considered to be, had to be excommunicated. So it gave the church ultimate power over the whole of Europe for 1,000 years. This doctrine. That's how important it was. It was entirely dependent on Christ dying on the cross, taking all the sins of all of humanity for all time on himself, which gave through this, the priests had the power to pardon you. So it was very much about power, this doctrine. And I think that's, right from the beginning what you said there, Hitendra, I really agree. And I really think this shift really happened at the time of Constantine, when it went from being, a religious minority, people who were there because they believed it, into being the official thing, and it got linked to the power structure, and that's when it became worldly rather than something more spiritual. That was the
Nag Hammadi scriptures actually are survivors of the first purge of about 130 to 160 years after Christ. So that's the first time that Christianity had this big split and was deciding what was the official books and what was not. Then again, when the Gnostic Christians burned the library, which escapes me at the moment.
You mean
Alexandria.
Alexandria Library in Egypt, yeah.
Right, which was around about the same time as Nicaea.
Oh,
And Nicaea was basically a group got together with the political leaders, and they said, hey, what are we going to do? This cult is getting big. They're starting to get violent. They've just destroyed a lot of property all over the place. What are we going to do? And they said, well, why don't we change all of our gods' names into saints, and we'll just feed them the same
Oh
thing
my
back and
God.
maintain control. Shortened, very simplified version.
fascinating. Just a comment from Pratik. I too believe it's all about power, and fear is a powerful weapon to subject others to. The kings were too powerful. For intelligent people to grow in power, they had to induce fear that they could have, so that they could have the power. Yeah, that's very true. And another way that they centralized power was through knowledge, and so education was very much centered around the monasteries. The priests were generally the only ones who knew how to read and write. So the ordinary people, they couldn't even read the Bible. They were completely dependent on the priests to interpret it.
Neither could the kings.
Even, well, couldn't the kings read and write?
And there were many, many political leaders during that time period. That's why it's called the Dark Ages, because they could not read and write. It was, what's his name in England? Alfred the Great, who said, no, our people need to learn to read and write. And I believe it was Charlemagne who learned to read and write in France and began starting moving.
That's towards the end of the Dark Ages, in the like
right.
1300s.
Right. Most of the people did not know how to read and write, including the political leaders.
So all knowledge and reading was in the hands of the church. That's amazing. Okay.
For the printing press, there was no way for them to read and write.
Yeah, no, they had books. They would copy them by hand.
But like paper was like everything of those sort was mostly available from in Oriental countries. Like paper was invented in China, or like the way Asian countries used to do, like while transmitting through like learning and oral verbal. They did not have that kind of.
No, they had books. They had handwritten books right from the time. And the Alexandria Library, the Greeks had handwritten books. They wrote on papyrus. The Egyptians had books.
So they were very expensive. That's why only like very few people could afford them.
They were for the elite. That's right. They were for the elite. But the thing here is that Hitendra is saying that even the kings who could afford them, they didn't know how to read.
So because I mean, it again, they had too much money and power. So why would they need to read? And that again was like, I think, how the church said that only you need to have one, like, I don't know what the position is, like someone who could guide on those intelligent matters, and then rest of them would not need to read and write.
Yeah, this is the era of the Vipras. Vipran control means and through the priesthood, they were the real power behind the throne. All these thrones, all these kings and princes, in the end, they couldn't go against the church.
Yes.
And they used this is how they maintained their control. That's right. So unfortunately, these many beautiful ideas that Jesus came with and were corrupted into a means of control. Crowd control is I was just reading actually a sermon. I was reading a sermon written by John Cleese of the Monty Python group. He was invited to give a sermon at a major church in the US, and it's actually brilliant. And he talks about a lot of this stuff. Very, very insightful. Okay, so this is yes, education was based on theology, not on scientific principles. Absolutely. So this was, as you say, the Dark Ages. That's why it was called the Dark Ages. It was an era of pretty much 1,000 years of ignorance, and and that was during a few hundred years of that was the Inquisition period. When towards the end of it was the Inquisition, when it was really brutally imposed, because that was when people were beginning to become educated, and the church was trying to stop it. And even people like Galileo were afraid, and Copernicus, and the Renaissance scientists, and they were all afraid of the church because the church still held this power, and they would torture people that were considered to be heretics. So it was a very dark period of history, and it was, the opposite. It couldn't be more opposite to what Jesus Christ actually represented.
It was anti-Christian to even bathe, according to the church.
God, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's where we get the term "cleanliness is next to godliness." Supposedly comes from the Reformation.
Oh, so interesting. Okay, you know this stuff really well. I like to.
There's a pastor grew up in Christian school.
Okay, he was a good Christian boy.
No.
Your dad wanted you to be. So from kosher, I like to frequently remind people that Jesus was a social dissident and he was murdered because of it. Very good point. And there are a lot of people, that take the position that Jesus was essentially a socialist. He wasn't into money. He didn't like the bankers very much. So there's maybe, who knows where the real Jesus lies, but somewhere maybe in that area. This is nice. Okay, I'm going to go back to some of the where have we got? Okay. So a few more of the ideas I want to present here. We've got a little time left. But that was very educative for me, certainly. I learned a lot that I didn't know already. I'm going to jump through some of these. Let me see. The Da Vinci Code, that was where I was. Okay. This is the fanciful version. All right. So here are some more of the sources. So apocryphal, these are the unofficial texts. They were banned. There are so many of these. As I said, there are about 40 or 50 of them, and different records or scriptures written by, or gospels. There are actually 40 apocryphal gospels. That's right, but they're all unofficial. They're not recognized by the church. But these may be as valid as those that are officially recognized. The Gospel of Thomas is one of the best known, written 200 years later. It's based on the letters of Thomas from India. Now, Thomas is the one who met Jesus on the road after he died, and it said, "Are you alive? Are you a ghost?" And Jesus said, "No, I'm still alive," basically. So that kind of seems like evidence to me. And he said that Thomas met with Jesus in India, in Punjab. That of course was declared as heretical. Well, they took a long time, 495. Some of these books were publicly burnt. So a lot of the record that might have been there has been destroyed. So here are some more of the unofficial texts. The Gospel of James talks of the marriage of Joseph and Mary, and normal birth, not a virgin birth. Okay. Most apocryphals speak of Jesus as a man, not a god. The Gospel of Philip tells of him migrating towards the east with his mother and his consort. This means post-crucifixion. And his consort, Mary Magdalene. Very controversial. Historically, the church and various councils rejected and accepted certain gospels, leaving only 5. We know that. The rest are declared heretical, so there are huge gaps, and it's a lot of suppression. There are lots of rumors of existing scriptures and records that were banned that are kept in the Vatican secretly. And who knows, maybe one day they'll be revealed and we'll actually get some more authentic insight into some of this. But for now, nobody's allowed to see them except a very small inner circle in the Vatican. The 5 Gospels of Tatian, a famous Syriac scholar, 2nd century. These were in vogue for hundreds of years in the Syrian church. Rome came and ordered them destroyed. Surprise, surprise. Apparently, Tatian said that after the resurrection, Jesus met with his disciples and his mother Mary as a man, not a spirit. So, interesting. This is from the Gospel of Thomas. His letters, he denies the virgin birth and cites the meeting in Punjab. We've seen that already. Now, okay, those are that's a brief look. There's thousands of pages of this stuff, which I haven't read all of, believe me. The Quran refers to Jesus, and I thought, when I learned this, I thought this is pretty cool, because there's hundreds of thousands, hundreds of years of war between these religions, but actually in the Quran they recognize Jesus as a great saint. They don't say he's the son of God or anything. So they said, we killed Christ, Jesus the son of Mary, and the apostle of Allah. But they killed him not, nor crucified him, but so it was made to appear to them, and those who differ therein are full of doubts, with no certain knowledge, but only conjecture to follow for of a surety that they killed him not. So the Quran acknowledges Jesus, they deny his divinity, they acknowledge him as a prophet, but it also says that he was not crucified, so that's pretty cool, interesting. Some of the Sanskrit sources, there are a number of different traditions and stories from India, but there weren't written records mostly, so most of this is passed down by word of mouth, except for the Puranas. So this Bhavishya Mahapurana was written between the 3rd and 7th centuries, describes the meeting of Isha Masya, Lord the Messiah, with Shala Vihana, the lord of the Shakas, in the land of Huma. In the mountains, O king, I hail from a land far away. I appeared in the Malichu, the barbarian country. I suffered at their hands. I am known as the son of God, Isha Putra. I am born of a virgin. And he gives a whole discourse on spirituality. And this Shali Vihana ruled from either AD 49 or 50 to around AD 78. And this concurs with other sources that say that Jesus lived to about 80 years old, which would have been around that time. So let us see. Isha's in the Natha. This is the one that you referred to, I think. The Nata Namavali. The Isha is the name used for Jesus. The scripture tells of a guru, Ishainata, comes to India at the age of 14. After 16 years of tapas, or sacrifice and spiritual discipline, he attained the science of samadhi, or spiritual attainment, spiritual elevation. And he went home, which means to Israel, to establish, or Palestine I should say, went home to establish the ministry. The Jews crucified him. He entered samadhi on crucifixion. The Jews thought he was dead. I love this part. The guru, Chaitanya, levitated and flew to revive him and bring him back to the sacred land of the Aryans, where Jesus established his ashram in the lower regions of the Himalayas in Kashmir. So that's pretty neat. The throne of Solomon. I'm going to skip this one because we're running out of time. But there's a number of stories. But there are 21 references in ancient texts that have been found bearing witness to Jesus' staying in Kashmir. This is all post-crucifixion. This one is very interesting because it's quite recent, and it's one of the main sources of many of the modern books and documentaries on this. So it's from this Russian who went to Kashmir in 1887. He found these Tibetan manuscripts about the early life of Jesus. He published The Life of Saint Isa in 1890. This claimed that Jesus studied in India from 14 to 29 years old. This is sounding familiar. And returned there after crucifixion. The Anglican Church tried to discredit the book with the support of the British Raj ruling India. They sought similar scriptures and destroyed them. So the Anglicans stepped in where the Catholics left off. These are just a tiny fraction of the books that have been written about this. I've read this one in the middle, that Jesus lived in India. I enjoyed that a lot. And there are thousands and thousands of these books, but many of them, their source material is from this Russian writer. And you'll find them, many of them referring to his what he wrote. And this is the one that I read and studied in some depth. It seems to be one of the more authentic ones. the link to the biographies there. I'll post that. That's the biography that I like. It's very nicely done. It seems, I kind of trust the BBC on historical stuff. It's rather good. I've got a couple of comments here. Oh, that's gold. The land of the Aryans. Interesting, isn't it? Yes. Well, there's another whole story about the Aryans and the Dravidians and that whole thing of Hinduism and the Aryans actually invading India, and them being in the north, and the southern Indians are Dravidians and they're darker. And there's a whole kind of Indian version of the racist story there, which I can tell you another day. One of the reasons I'm not a Hindu. Okay, what have we got? Oh, hence the caste system. It's got a lot to do with the caste system, exactly. The Aryans were the ones who brought the caste system to India from their original land of Iran and north of Iran in southern Russia. And they were a warrior cult, and they had the caste system. India, the indigenous people, did not have a caste system. They were tantric. They had a tantric mystical tradition. They were the original yogis. So this BBC documentary is excellent. I will give you the link to that. So the next part of this, which will happen in a couple of weeks, is continues this question: who was Jesus? How did he become who he became? What do contemporary sages in our era have to say about him? Some of them through perhaps their intuition or spiritual insight, through their psychic knowledge or power. And really, for me, the question is, what are the lessons that we might take away from all of this? So that's what I want to explore next time. I will do one thing. Firstly, I want to just mention an event coming up. Yeah, I agree. Thank you from Advaita. Very grateful for everyone's contributions to this talk. That's gold. Yeah. So some of you have really, really a lot of knowledge of this from your own background, which has added so much. It's fascinating. Thank you, especially to Hendra and Karun. And Karun's mentioning here that there's some doubt around the Notovich writings. I read about that. Unclear. Like a lot of this. It's unclear. But there are so many sources that to me, it kind of tells me something that it's not just from one. Even if you cast doubt on one or two of these sources, there are 50 others, and it seems to be general agreement from many of these sources on some points. But it's still a mystery, that's for sure. Okay, I want to tell you about this event I've got coming up in a couple of days that you may join if you wish. It's a free event online. I'm doing this. This is hosted by the Kellogg Alumni Association. Kellogg is one of the leading business schools in the US. They're out of Northwestern University, and they asked me to give a workshop, and we got a lot of people coming. We got like 180, 170 people registered or something. Of course, half of them will turn up because it's free. So, but we're going to have a lot of people there. This is interesting. Some of the Bible stories sound a lot like a yogi to me. Yeah, except the woman in the well. Yeah, and fasting in the desert. I mean, Jesus went and fasted in the desert for 40 days, so did Buddha, and so on and so forth. Some Indian datas from Anandamaga, they're talking to each other, and they mention that Baba asked, who said that Jesus died on the cross? Yeah, I've got a little bit of information about that I can share with you in the next session about what Anandamurti said about Jesus Christ. He didn't reveal much, but enough to convince me, but that's just my preference of sources. So I will post two things in the chat for you, two links, one to the movie and one to this event, all right? So I can actually copy this directly from here. That makes it easy. And where is this chat here? Here we go. Oh, you you want to know more about what Anandamurti said about Jesus? I'm telling you next time. I'm saving it up. All right, I will tell you one thing before we finish. It's my favorite bit. But the other stuff I'll keep for next time. It got to be some exciting next episode thing, that sort of stuff. Okay, so that's the event. Now the other one I was going to share with you is the documentary, the BBC documentary. The link to that. I really do think it's good. And if you want to watch something, there are many to choose from. This is one that I liked, but I haven't watched them all. There are probably other good ones as well. But I do, as I said, on historical documentaries, I think the BBC generally do a pretty good job. So there you go. Take a look at that. Now, okay, the last thing I'll tell you. So why is this... these two presentations, why is this thing, why do I call it the gentlest soul? It's very simple. One thing that Baba did say about Jesus Christ is that he was the gentlest soul who ever walked the earth. And I thought that was incredibly beautiful. So that's who Jesus was for me. Thank you, everybody. We're getting some more really neat comments. Hitendra, ultimately, the Golden Rule is an encapsulation of Jamas and Niyamas, the Ten Commandments, the Five Agreements of the Toltecs, right? These are, they seem to have influenced one another, or one come from the other. Again, commonalities. Jesus doing miracles. There are clearly examples from both ancient and modern times of Indian yogis doing similar miracles. For sure. We'll look at some of those parallels in the teachings, because this is another way of kind of trying to getting some sort of an idea. Where did this come from? Where did Jesus's ideas come from? It really wasn't from Judaism. It's very, very different. So what is it similar to? And as I said, it looks to me in many ways similar to particularly Tantric Buddhism. But to be continued, okay?
And I would just like to say regarding the Aryan migration.
Yep.
Like, there are now a lot of papers and studies, and like a lot of scientific community believes that Aryan migration never took place. So like I read a lot of papers on them, and one thing, and they did like all sorts of genetic analysis and to prove the point, but one thing they missed is the date. So if they all like papers which refuse Aryan migration, they are all based on like 2000 BC. And I agree, at that time there was no Aryan migration. It was already happened.
Much earlier.
Much earlier. So they are right. At that time, no Aryan migration took place. So, but that doesn't then refute the fact that Aryan migration never took place, because they got the date wrong.
Yep, I agree. That's a piece of history I'm very fascinated by. It's kind of separate from this, but of course Ramesh wrote a whole book on that. I don't know if you read it. Did you read his History of Tantra?
I could not find the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's not available anywhere. I've been trying to.
I think I've got more than one copy. I'll check. From my perspective, it's the best book on the history of Tantra. He researched it for 10 years. Of course, it's through the lens of Anandamaga. He's a disciple, but he really did look at both sides. I mean, this is known to be controversial. He really addressed that very head on, and what you just said is definitely something that he covers and concurs with in that book. I think you would like it a lot. I will look for a copy. I'll try and find a copy for you, okay?
Thanks.
So through Ananda Marga Press. Press?
No, it's through Inner World Publications, which is a writers' cooperative with of Magis, David Sheesh and myself and Mahesh Rananda and Ramesh and a lot of others published through that. We set up our own writers co-op.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you all very much. This is I learned a lot. I must say, Henry, make sure you're here next time because you've got such a good deep background in this. You're really able to contribute a lot.
And I was my dad's research assistant.
Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Thank
So
you.
the next one.
It's rather humbling.
Oh no, this is I love to learn about this. The next one is on the first Tuesday. So we have Coach is just asking when the next one is on this topic. It won't be next week. That's still November. Anyway, next week is Thanksgiving, isn't it? Let me just check my calendar, make sure I get this right.
The first Tuesday in December is December 1st.
It is indeed. So next Tuesday is the 24th. We'll just have Kirtana meditation as usual from 7 till 8. The following week we will have the second part of this on December the 1st.
What time does it start? Because I just happened to jump in on the YouTube.
Okay, so
saw it was on Zoom.
The Kirtana meditation starts at 7 on West Coast time, and that goes for about a bit less than an hour, say 50 minutes, and then we go into the philosophy class. So the whole thing is 7 till 9. Well, it's nearly 9, yeah. Okay.
It's nearly 9 there.
It's now is 9 o'clock, yeah, almost.
Okay, so 3 hours. So
yes, 3 hours difference. All right, thanks, Kosha. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, the Inner World Publications, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's on Amazon. I'll find it. Thanks, Karun. Namaskar, everyone. See you all soon.